Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Veronika Cheplygina to you. She's working on machine learning in medical image analysis. She studied computer science in the Netherlands at Delft, and now she's an assistant professor in Copenhagen in Denmark. And also she blogs and writes and twitters about academic life in general. And what is really special about her, she also writes and talks about failure meaning her failures in her academic career. And she also has an interview series about failures that other researchers have experienced in their career. So this is really inspiring because all of us, we all do failures and we do not succeed in everything, but we really try to hide it. And Veronika is really bringing that to the open. I think this is really great and really, well, motivating and inspiring. And also today she will talk about her experiences with open science, and she will also give practical advices for the uncertain researchers. So please, Veronika, the stage is yours.
Thank you very nice. Thank you very much for the invite. It's very nice to be here. Yeah, and thanks for the introduction. So yeah, today I'm talking about my own experiences in open science. And I think after the invite, like a couple of months ago, I had to think of a title, and I liked calling it the unreasonable effectiveness for the uncertain researcher. So this is I talk about my experiences, because open science is many things. I think I'm not particularly qualified to give like a introduction to open science. But just today on Mastodon, I saw a very nice slide deck from Dan Quintana come by. So if you want to know more about that, check it out. So I'll go kind of through some experiences throughout different steps in my career. And I'll try to give advice based on that, sample size of 1. And also I'll have some slides from a Halloween themed talk, because I gave a related talk a couple of years ago around Halloween called Data Horrors. And I thought the slides were too fun to like change them all to the standard layout. All right, so this was kind of covered in the introduction. I'm doing machine learning and medical image analysis, and I was in the Netherlands for many career stages. And since start of last year, so almost 2 years now, I'm an associate professor in Denmark at IT University of Copenhagen. And if you have read a bit more on my website, maybe you can also gather that these steps were kind of not entirely this list linear as it neatly looks in this list. And I think at each decision point, either my own decision or decisions of others to hire me, I think open science maybe played a role a little bit. Hence the unreasonable effectiveness. So it feels also funny to me to sometimes be invited to give talks about open science, because similar to severe failures, there's some part you see. So I think the part you see is that I give talks about this occasionally. But actually, I'm not a very good open scientist, because things are breaking all the time. I'm also a little bit lazy, so I don't do all the practices that I think are actually good to do, and so on. So starting with my PhD, what was open science like then for me? I probably had never heard of that term at that point in time. I did know about public data sets and public code. So what I was working with were, I was classifying a particular shape of data sets. So they could have been about images or about text, but they all had a similar property statistically, let's say. So these were kind of public, very small CSV data sets that somebody had already processed and extracted features from. So I had nice CSV files I could just load and use. And then people in the lab that I was working on, they had this publicly available MATLAB toolbox, so it seemed I had kind of all the ingredients for doing open science. And also, since we didn't do deep learning back then, the analysis I did and the data sets were so small, analysis could take minutes or maybe hours if I did something complicated. So oftentimes, if I'd find myself that I needed to do something differently, I could just rerun the whole thing. So potentially, I could rerun everything from my PhD thesis in a couple of hours, maybe days. But even though I had this public data and code, there were kind of really bad things going on there. So this toolbox, well, what you did, toolbox was you downloaded some code and you put it in a folder that all the different files that do different functions, that they're reachable from MATLAB's path. So if you would have in some folder a function calculate.m, if in my code I call calculate, it searches for where on the path it has a file calculate.m. The problem is if you have multiple folders on your computer, which you at one point added, which all contain that file, it's possible that it will get not the latest one that you thought, but some other one. So often I had no connection between kind of the results I was creating and the version of the code that was at that point the current one. So even though the toolbox itself was version controlled, my modifications of how to use it were not. So that's how I ended up rerunning things many times. I think I did a lot of little experiments for maybe half of the time I had for my PhD, and then one of my advisors said I had to be writing journal papers. So then I was writing things up and not doing more experiments. And I think as a break from doing only writing, I tried to organize my code a little bit more. Also for the submission to journals. And I think it was suggested to me at the time that since the review time in journals is very long, I should probably post a preprint so that at least in my next paper, I can also refer to my earlier work. That sounded like a good idea, so I did that. And with it, I shared data and code, but badly. So I shared the data, which was, actually from many different sources. I collected at many different researchers' websites. I just made a zip file and then posted it on my own website because that was what I thought you should do. And then I shared the code because I was getting worried about all these different versions, and I submitted this thing to a journal now. I wanted to have a kind of a standalone package you could download and rerun everything, and it produced the table in my journal paper. And then the code was not really commented or cleaned up, but I did sort of sort it out enough to get to this. Okay, I can produce these results again. This goes into the zip, and this goes, I think, also on my own website. And this was inspired a bit by, oh, you don't see it now, by the what's called the CRAPL license by Matt Might, and it's a license that allows you to release all your code as is, because it's better for maybe the few interested to have it out there than not. And so I did this, and I've attached the license to the zip file. And this was surprisingly quite effective, because some people started getting in touch with me about my preprint or the data they found there. One person found a bug in the general toolbox, but it could have affected my code, but it did not. People wanted to use also re-implement my method in Python and so on. So that was actually quite nice. It wasn't like a lot of emails, but it was very nice to get that contact in the beginning. And then I think I also got the first citations of the preprints. Some of those probably were from myself because that was kind of the intention, that I could cite my own work in the next work. But also maybe those other PhD students who were contacting me. And I think later on I actually benefited from what I think was called a preprint bump. I don't have a reference for who made that term. But essentially, if you are a couple of years from when there's a new topic and you're searching for something like what's the paper we need to cite on the topic, the papers that were preprints 2 years prior maybe already have some citations, and then you think, that must be a good one. So I should definitely include this one since it's being used. So I think I've benefited from this preprint bump kind of. And I did indeed need to revise the papers like up until 2 years later, including some new experiments and such. I think the initial reviews took like over a year, and then there was some major revision. I did some things and there was something else. So I was actually using my own standalone code to sort of make sure that everything was working. That's the CRAPA license again. Then I moved to working only on medical image datasets. So no longer tiny CSV datasets, but larger images that you need to figure out yourself how to extract things from. So this is still pre-deep learning. And also now, because of this, the analysis would take days or weeks at least, and I couldn't just do everything on my own computer anymore. And all these datasets now they were not public datasets, but some collaborators of my advisor who I think had an agreement with my advisor that I can use their datasets, something of this sort. There were some interesting things here I encountered with regard to the data horrors. So there was always an unwritten manual to the data. So that was rather no manual. Usually there would be scans and maybe an Excel sheet with some metadata on which scan is which patient and something about their diagnosis, for example. But there were kind of, when dealing with it, some peculiar things. So for example, some code I received for, I'm not sure I received the code. It's something I figured out and then I was told the solution. So patient 33, something was going really wrong with patient 33 and I couldn't figure it out. It turned out that the original data, so as a CT scan, the person was like flipped upside down for some reason. So the algorithm was of course completely confused by this. And then the unwritten manual was, well, if that's that patient, you need to flip the image. Or there was some variables in the metadata that nobody could tell me really how to interpret. So there was a variable status, and status could be 0 or 1. And I assumed this was the diagnosis, but I didn't know what it refers to, whether 0 is having it or 0 is not having it. Then with this code I was using for it, which I had to run on a compute server now, I got into some kind of optimization dilemmas, because I think initially I wanted to write clean code that could be reusable for these kind of scans. And so I did that. And then it turned out that to run that code on the server, I couldn't get through because I split everything up like nicely, like each patient, each type of processing could be done in parallel, so to make it modular and nice. But that meant I had many jobs on the server, and then they wouldn't actually start. So I had to make everything in what I knew were bad code practices just to actually get the code to run. So yeah, at this point, I think what I created was also not great code, and it was tailored to really this specific situation, including patient 33 and these kind of tricks. So I wasn't sure it was useful for sharing. I think I shared some of it, and it might have still been useful to maybe a couple of people. After my, well, kind of between my postdoc and starting my faculty position, yeah, Claudia mentioned it in the introduction, but kind of a lot of things happen here personally and professionally. I got into CV of failures and giving some talks about this. Also, I think about open science, but kind of maybe this period is when I started thinking about, maybe I started doing open science not anymore accidentally, but more as a deliberate choice. And what I did, at least initially, well, there were many more projects and collaborators, and particularly many students to supervise. I was also kind of not so happy with what I had to deal with the clinical data from before, so I made the executive decision that we use public data. We put the projects on GitHub with what I call lazy GitHub. So you don't need to use all of the million functions that it offers, but a cycle of pull, add, commit, and push is probably useful to do regularly. So I tried to make some kind of guidelines, templates for how to work with the students I was supervising. And I guess I was kind of meta sharing how I did that also on my blog, for example. And mostly I think the responses were positive, especially also from the students. And also I think from some of more senior faculty who felt that these were important things to do for research. There were a few kind of less positive comments in the line of shouldn't you do more real research instead? Because this was to them, yeah, something you spend time on that doesn't translate into high impact papers. But I think I wasn't doing that already in their view. So, and the other one would be like, that's not how to do open science, as in, well, you're doing this, but there's 5 other things you should also do to do it properly, right? And okay, maybe, but I think doing little steps is a good start. And well, I was doing these things in 2020. It didn't look like open science was particularly helpful in me continuing in academia. So in 2020, I was when this tweet was made, I was leaving academia at that point, and I had no idea really about Denmark. And one thing that happened, which is okay, maybe not just open science, but kind of a social media thing, is I asked Gaël Varocor, who's one of the creators of scikit-learn, if we should write a paper. And at this point, we don't know each other, or he definitely does not know who I am, I think. And in the tweet I'm referencing, I'm saying Ringo Ring needs more Easter egg acknowledgements. It's because in an earlier paper of his, in acknowledgements, he thanks Alexandra Abakian of Sci-Hub for help with the literature review. So I thought that was really cool. And so I'm commenting here as a reply to something he said about machine learning. And I was like, okay, that's let's write a review. And he actually responded, and yeah, we had some nice conversations. And some months later, oh, that's Alexandra Albakian, in case you didn't know. Maybe you recognize her from the wavy picture. So some months later, then we got to a preprint, which we initially shared only as a preprint, and it had a box on top like, this is a preprint. If you have any comments or questions, please email us. And this was kind of scary maybe, but I think a very good thing ultimately. So we did actually get lots of very nice feedback. And another thing that happened is that we could see like an Altmetric, which is a site that can keep track mentions of your paper. We saw like what people were saying about it, and maybe who would be also good potential reviewers to suggest when we did submit to a journal. In the end, none of the reviewers who actually reviewed it, it was because they both shared their names. They didn't overlap with our list, but I think it was nice for the editors at the journal that we could do this. So this was recently then published in, well, already half a year ago in April. And this was a kind of fully online open science collaboration with all code from the start in the GitHub repo, and me being scared by Gael's GitHub proficiency, but it was a really nice collaboration. So overall, I think to summarize, for me, the benefits have been that I think it's easier to do projects or to continue projects, especially if you've left them alone for a while, and gives you clarity with your collaborators. And now I'm actually thinking of another paper I probably should have mentioned, where there were 5 years between the initial data collection and the publication. And it was also very helpful that the code was kind of made to be used by multiple people. And I think it takes time at first, but kind of saves time and effort down the line, and probably also saves some compute resources. You can get some feedback before publishing, and just make whatever you're creating better. Also holds for like instructions for how to use your code, and generally gives you some opportunities for your work to be discovered, as through like other researchers contacting me. In my impressions, it become increasingly a part of academic job applications and grants. I think when I started applying for things, it wasn't really yet an explicit kind of thing on the list, but now you can actually see it in postings. And I think with GitHub, you can have a portfolio which is useful for many employers. And I don't mean that you need to have like a super extensive code on super complicated projects. It can also be that you have pretty good documentation for how to reproduce the plot in your paper. And kind of a meta thing, I think this gave me often new things to experiment with, like learning about new platforms or toolboxes, and this created some learning opportunities. And I think this is the part that's very useful if you are uncertain on what to do next, or if you are certain but the employers are not certain for you. Some work in progress that I'm doing. I'd like to still understand better how to make kind of shared procedures or conventions on how data and code should be documented. There are, of course, various guides on this, but often specific to some applications. One example I share is by Kirsty Whitaker. It's about various lab management procedures, like where to find things and what should a person do who newly arrives. I think these kind of things are very valuable. I'd also like to get better understanding of licenses and copyright, because I don't think I do that properly. I'd like to know, for example, what happens to the licensing of a figure that I use in a slide that is now going to be in a talk on YouTube. And finally, I'm interested how to make the interoperability of like different data and code easier, because things are stored in different formats, and often a lot of time goes into just trying to load the data in a way to fit it to the code. So that would be great to see more solutions for this, or maybe they exist, I need to learn about them. Some tips, which I think I mentioned several before. I think it's good to start small, but make it into a habit. So I would, when giving talks, I think this is about my first talk about open science. I had a template to-do list I would trigger for all the things I needed to do, which include actually, making slides and practicing the talk, but also uploading the slides and sharing them on social media and so on. I admit I'm not as good with this now, but often now the organizers are kind enough to share everything. But for this, it's also important to remember to not do everything at once, and kind of have progress goals for yourself. So you don't need to have all the things that open science can be, but maybe a few things make sense for your project. I think it's good to find some support and other people who are wanting to do the same type of thing. Here are some initiatives I listed where you might find people. In particular, I highlighted here the Turing Way, which is, among others, also a book on how to do reproducible science that everybody can contribute to on GitHub in a reproducible way. And it's a nice community with also events and a Slack group and so on. Another one is Open Life Science, which is a mentorship program. And you sign up and you get a mentor, and then you have some open science goals that you work on over a semester or so. And a few others to maybe Google, like reproducibility, where we are now. There's reproducibility networks in different countries. So for example, UKRN is for the UK. In the Netherlands, I know that most university cities had an open science community. So if you search for OSC, then Amsterdam, Eindhoven, all the cities come up. I'm not sure if the same kind of thing exists in other countries, but maybe there's something. You can find people on social media. Mastodon is much better with hashtags than Twitter. So you can check out there who is into talking about this. And finally, I think maybe there are field-specific groups like on Slack or similar, which, I mean, they don't need to be about open science specifically. It can be about computer science research and practice, but it could be a place where you could ask like field-specific questions, like how do I do this with this type of code, which you might not find in a kind of open science general place. And finally, you should reward yourself. Here, this is some kind of media interview, and people are feeling good about what they did. I don't remember actually the story exactly right now, but it's nice to get recognition for what you did. I have here an example from Impact Story, which I think sadly is either it already doesn't exist or it will not be continued, but this was a platform where you could get, you would sign up with your ORCID, and then it would track automatically all sorts of things about your publications. And I got these nice badges about being in the top 10% of open access, but also some other fun ones like that my writing is of a level that's easily understood at grade 13 or above, based on its abstracts and titles. I did not know this, but it was fun to get a badge for it. Well, and Altmetric is also can be fun to check out. So this is the one for the paper, for the recent paper with Gael. So you can see what people are saying about it on different platforms. And this in particular is a, is a map of like where the mentions are coming from. And well, besides badges, yeah, just do what you like to celebrate, bake a cake or like do a little dance. A couple of more tips, recent papers. And that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.